Glad to have you guys here tonight. Welcome to the mission. If you are a freshman, I just want to reiterate and say, hey, I hope you guys join us Saturday for that Six Flags trip. Every year I talk to freshmen who are like, I'm not really into roller coasters. I don't know. And I just want to tell you, it does not matter. Every year there's a chunk of our group that is not there for the roller coasters, but just wants to hang out. And they have a great time. We have a great time either way. So if that's you, I would encourage you, don't let that discourage you. It's going to be a really great trip. I know we also talked about baptisms. If you are a Christian and you haven't made the decision to get baptized, Jesus, it's like really the first instructions we're given, like kind of the first step of obedience we can take after giving our life to God. And so sometimes, I think ideally we do it right away, and there's lots of times that we don't, and there's lots of reasons why we might not. Monique was just sharing, she got baptized, just at her last baptism, and Monique's been here since she was involved in high school. And so there's nothing wrong if it's like, oh, you waited a while, but I want to encourage you, if you've never been baptized, to consider doing that. It's a public proclamation. It's a statement of faith of God, I identify my life being with you, and my old life being gone. And so we're going to pass around some clipboards for that. If you are interested, just if you're like, hey, I just want more information, I want to know how that works or when, we're going to pass around some clipboards. Just sign your info. We'll follow up either tomorrow or early next week, just so you know. Actually, no, it'll be tomorrow because the baptism is this weekend. So we will follow up tomorrow to fill you in on all the details because that's this Sunday. But it's a good move. I encourage you to do it. Obviously, that's something that you would need to talk to your parents about. So as we jump into stuff tonight, every week that we're here, we're digging into what does it look like to know God. The name of our high school ministry is The Mission, and our kind of sub-statement is to know Him and to make Him known. And so every time that we're getting together, we're trying to figure out how do we get to know God? How do we grow in a relationship with Him so that we can do this thing that He's called us to do, this life that He's called us to live? Now, going back to the very beginning, a history lesson, maybe most of you guys are aware, some of you might not know. God created you to be with Him in fellowship, in close proximity forever. That's what we were created for. Now, Adam and Eve, they jacked that up for all of us. But if it wasn't them, it would have been me or you. I think, so we can't necessarily just place all the blame on them. However, they introduced sin into the world, which meant a couple things. It meant death entered the world. Bam, we're not living forever. It meant this barrier between us and God. And so they got driven out of the Garden of Eden, where they just got to hang out with God all day. And there's a number of other things connected to that. But what happened is God created him and was like, hey, you get to just enjoy me forever. Every good thing that I have for you, it's yours. I freely give it to you. And you get to just be with me and enjoy all of this, everything I created for all of existence. And they were going to expand this garden to overtake the earth and just be in this paradise. What happened is Satan in the garden tempted them with a lie that was like, hey, I know God said that He's offering you every good thing, but there was one tree that He told you not to take from, and Satan was like, God's holding out on you. He doesn't want you to really get and understand everything. That tree is really what you need to have real freedom. If you want to be like God and you want to be able to control everything for yourselves and not rely on Him, that's what you need. And so He convinced them, oh, God's holding out on us. There's something that God, He offered a bunch of stuff, but not this thing, and He's holding out. And so they ate from that tree, and that's what brought sin into the world. So all of us are born with this nature in us that likes sin. I don't care if you're the best person in here, you have a sin nature. Now, your sin nature might manifest itself differently than mine, because some of us are really good at just on the outside, acting like we're really great and everything's put together and we're really godly, but we know, like, in our thoughts and our actions when no one's looking, it might not be the case. We're born with this inclination to sin. So I'm going to talk about temptation tonight, and I'm going to ask for you guys' attention and respect. So if you're sitting next to someone who's distracting you, maybe ask them not to talk to you. We gave you guys note papers on every chair and pens. That's to help you kind of like focus, pay attention. And then afterwards, when I'm done talking tonight, even if I preach the most profound, life-changing message you've ever heard, which I might, I don't know, I'm not, it's up to the Lord. I'm going to do the best job I can, but it doesn't matter how good it is because our brains are leaky and we will forget whatever profound, amazing things we heard. And that's why we give you guys note papers, because I would encourage you, hey, when you go home, store this somewhere, read it later, look it over, because you're not going to remember it all. And so I want to talk about temptation, which is the most common human experience. Temptation is, and when I talk about that, some of you guys grown up in church and are very familiar with the word temptation. Some of you guys are newer, and that word might sound weird, elicit some interesting ideas in your brain. Temptation is the draw to anything other than what God calls good. That's what temptation is. When I say temptation, it is the draw in me to anything else other than what God says is good. And if you are self-aware at all, you know that there are lots of things that we're drawn to that are not what God calls good. We're drawn to things, all of us, myself included, drawn to things that God directly is like, hey, that's horrible. That will ruin your life. That will destroy you. That will bring death to you. That will bring judgment on you. And I'm like, I still like it. I still want it. There's something about that still seems appealing. That's the sin nature in me and in you. And so we're all tempted in different ways and by different things. But this experience exists for all of us. And if you don't already know, you're going to deal with temptations in your life up until the day that you die. If you want to walk with God, you have to know you are going to have a draw in you towards the wrong things. You don't ever graduate out of that. It's not like you reach some kind of black belt Christianity where all of a sudden nothing like phases you anymore. That doesn't exist. They change. There are temptations that I used to think when I was in high school, I can never get over this. I could never get past this. I couldn't even imagine what life would be like not struggling with certain things. And now it almost like makes me laugh because I'm like, I can't believe that, I thought like that was my whole life. And now that's not even like a thought in my brain. There are things that used to be such a draw for me that now like disgust me. And I'm like, no, I don't want that. But temptations change. So now it's different things. But we have some wrong ideas about temptation. And so there's some truth that I want us to understand to equip you guys for right now, because all of us deal with temptation, but also in the future to know, all right, what do I do with that though? If every Christian struggles with temptation, then are we all just doomed? Like, oh, well, I guess whatever I struggle with, that's just how I'm going to live my life, and like hope it doesn't turn out too bad. No, spoiler alert, no, that's not how it works. All temptation finds its roots in deceit. All temptation, every draw for me towards the wrong thing, the root of it comes from deceit. Just like Adam and Eve in the garden, Satan lied to them and said, God is holding out on you. And if you do this thing, if you go after this thing that God said not to, it'll work better for you. You'll be glad that you did. All temptation works like that. All temptation, at the root of it, it's a lie. It's a lie that says, if I do this, I'm going to be happier. It's a lie that says, when I give into this, nobody's going to know. It's not going to affect anything. It's going to make me happy. It's going to make me feel good. This person is going to complete me or insert, whatever thing. All temptation finds its roots in deceit. The Bible calls the devil the father of lies, and says that when he's lying, he's just speaking because lying is in his nature. All he does is lie. It's who he is. And so I want to say this. We get into temptation, and when I say that, I think every time I talk about like your temptations, all of us are going to have different things that jump into our mind. I remember being at youth group and feeling like nervous every time the pastor talked about that, wondering like, does everybody know what mine are? And like, we're all self-conscious about the things that we struggle with. But you can never have victory over temptation until you can identify the lie. So if temptation finds its root in deceit, it's a lie, you will never have victory over temptation. You'll never be able to master it. It will always have an extra hold and power over you if you don't know what the lie is. I think about like a mouse trap. Mouse traps work because a mouse sees something that looks enticing or smells enticing. And you could know, like, okay, that's sketchy over there. Maybe, like, I know I shouldn't try to, like, grab that cheese or that peanut butter or whatever you're trying to bait your mousetrap with, but I know it's going to be really good if I do. And if I can get away with it, it'll be awesome. The payoff will be great. That's kind of how temptation works. What I mean by identifying the lie, though, and a lot of us live like that, by the way. We live like temptation is this amazing, glorious thing. But we know if we give into it, we might get caught. We might get snatched. It might come back to bite us. It might not work out. And we just kind of hope that, like, we'll get away with it. And lots of times we think we are. We're like, whatever's tempting us, we're grabbing it and like, oh, that actually worked out okay. Like, God didn't strike me with a lightning bolt. That felt good. I had fun. Like that was a good time. And then that temptation comes up again and we're like, that looks really good. Last time, it was fine. I got away with it. We do it again. What identifying the lie is this. When you recognize that what God has called you to is infinitely better, and when the things that God says, hey, these things are going to jack you up, these things are going to wreck your life, it's recognizing and seeing those things for what they are. When I was younger, I didn't understand, I didn't see things for how they were. So when it came to like pornography, I didn't walk with Jesus or even try to until I was like a junior in high school. And by that time, like, hitting puberty in early junior high, whatever, it was just like, I loved pornography. That was like a very normal thing for my life. My friends, we talked about it very casually. We joked about it. It was just like a normal thing. I had no idea, this is going to like wreck my life. This is rewiring my brain and going to affect my relationships and potentially future marriage and all these things. But you can't have victory over temptation until you can identify the lie. And so when we think that sin is good, it will always have a power that honestly is really hard to resist. And long term, you're not gonna always resist. Any moment of weakness, when I think being with my girlfriend and doing whatever we want to do and having no boundaries, when I think like, man, that makes me happy, that feels good, I feel emotionally connected, like, that's great. If that's all I think about it, even though I have some like ideas in my head of, God says, like I should be out on sexual immorality, that it's a certain like special kind of destructive, and he says that, all of sexual intimacy should be within the confines of marriage. It's one thing to know that. It's another thing for me to actually believe that as I look around at things in my life. So again, identifying the lie. The things that tempt you in your life, it comes down to a matter of perspective of, do I believe what God says about these things? Because if you don't, it's not enough to just think, this is bad. I'm going to get in trouble if I do this. My parents told me not to. My small group leader would be really disappointed. That is not enough motivation to keep you away from sin. The only way you can really have victory is if you see things and you recognize that's a lie. Adam and Eve in the garden, that tree, Satan's like, God's holding out on you. That tree is really what you want. You should go after it. And they thought, yeah, you know what? Maybe God is holding out on us. Maybe that's what we need. Identifying the lie would have been to recognize, no, God's already told us that he's given us everything. And he told us that tree leads to death. God told them in no uncertain terms, hey, the day that you eat from that tree, you shall surely die. And bam, they ate from it. Sin came in and introduced death to the world. And all the brokenness and all the junk that we now experience in life came from that. Because they didn't identify the lie. They didn't know what God really said, or they didn't believe it. And so in your life, the things that tempt you, you have to recognize each time it's this lie. And it's honestly, it's good. And I still practice this in those moments where I'm tempted. I'll sit and think like, what do I actually feel about this temptation right now? I know I want to do it. I know I want to go there. I know I want to watch that thing. But what do I think it's going to do for me? And if I'm honest with myself, there are times where I'm like, I think it's going to make me feel better. I feel sad or lonely or empty, and I think this is going to make me feel better. But when I talk like that, I can also recognize, okay, that's a lie, because the last 10,000 times, it didn't make me feel better. It didn't make me less lonely. It didn't better my life. For you guys, each temptation, I encourage you to sit and think, what do I believe about this? What do I think I'm going to get out of this? What do I think it's going to do for me? The truth, when you're honest with yourself, might be, I think God doesn't see it and notice. You might think, I think God's not really going to do anything if I decide to pursue this sin. Or I've already done it a bunch of times and nothing bad's happened, so, I think I'm cool. That lie might be, I'm gonna feel love and fulfillment from other people. I'm gonna feel accepted finally. What is the lie? And as you think about that, it gets easier. Again, I talked about the mouse in the trap being like, oh man, that whatever's in there looks really good. It's a different perspective though, when you look at what's in the trap and you're like, oh, that's poison. Then it's like, oh, I'm not drawn to that. Like, that's poison. I don't want to eat that. That will make me sick and kill me. No, thank you. That's what having victory over temptation really looks like. It's being able to identify and lie and recognize that is toxic to every good thing in my life. Oh, that will hurt me. That thing that, I think is not a big deal, whatever I'm looking at on whatever app or whoever's house I want to go to, knowing what kind of things are going on that I shouldn't be a part of. Oh, that's detrimental to my life with God. That's sin. I want to avoid that. It changes things. All of a sudden, it loses some of that draw and power that it had. But if I really think that doing that thing, drinking, whatever, that was the thing for me in high school. If I really think that's going to make me happy and make me feel good, then anytime I hit a low moment where my defenses aren't up and I'm not super gung-ho about Jesus, then I just fall back. And then I'm like, why, God? I'm trying, why? And it's because I keep believing the lie. And any moment of weakness, I'm going to go back to what I really believe. And sometimes what we really believe is that sin is better and that no one's going to know, that it's going to make us happy, that it's not going to really affect our life. And so you just have to know that whatever you really believe about sin, it's going to make its way into your life. 1 Peter 5:8 says, be sober-minded and be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Be sober-minded. Be on the alert. He's like, hey, the devil's not taking any breaks. And so you have to be really careful about the things that you are thinking about and watching and listening to and doing, because the devil is looking for ways to have inroads into your life, to draw you into sin. Our enemy is a hunter, a proficient hunter. He's like an expert fisherman who knows exactly what bait to use. He knows how we typically respond, what our weaknesses are, And he's going to keep trying to like push every button to get you to give into the things that God says, hey, those are going to wreck your life. The things that are going to pull us away from God. And so I want to give you guys some practical, what does it look like? If you can identify, all right, I know there's some temptations in my life. There's some things that I'd like to move away from, to cut out, but I'm struggling to do that. How do I do that? What steps can I take? I want to give you some practical questions to ask yourself, which will help you figure that out. So the first question to ask is who? Who? Who are you around that you find yourself typically more tempted around? It might be that guy or that girl that you're into. It might be friends. It might be people that you game with. Because I know and you know that there's something about our filter that goes out of the window when we're talking to strangers over the internet. There just is. There's like not accountability. Nobody else knows. And so, again, the who. Who do you find yourself most tempted around? I think about my life in high school. It was my friend Dustin. At that time, he was my best friend. Dustin sold drugs. Dustin's dad was like never home. And when he was home, he kind of just let us do whatever and didn't really care. So his house was the party house. And I knew at a certain point when I was trying to understand temptation, like I got to make some changes. I'm tired of being a slave to my sin. I was like, all right, what steps do I take? And I asked myself the who, and I was like, it's Dustin. I can't hang out with Dustin. Because every time I know exactly what's going to be around me, I know what we're going to do, I know who else is going to end up showing up, and what I'm going to end up doing when that happens. And so thinking about the who is important. Hebrews 7:26, it says that Jesus was separate from sinners and exalted above the heavens, completely different from sinners. Now, that's different because we always talk about, what? Jesus was friends with sinners. Jesus hung out with sinners. Jesus sat with sinners. And that's true. But what this means is Jesus did not get mixed up in what they were mixed up in. He stood out. Jesus did not blend in with sinners. He ministered to them. He reached out to them. But he wasn't a chameleon around sinners. Jesus was bold about the truth. You can see his interactions with sinners and know he wasn't soft about telling the truth. He loved more than any of us could ever understand when he spoke the truth in love. But he was different from them. He stood out from them. You all know, that verse, bad company corrupts good morals. And the reason why, and by the way, I've been in high school and I've heard that verse and I was like, I hung out with my bad friends yesterday. I'm fine. Like, I didn't, whatever, go smoke weed with them and do whatever. And so we have these like instances where we just like, will make excuses for our friends that we maybe know we shouldn't hang out with as much. But the truth is this, it turns into just hanging out with temptation. And sure, you can stand up to temptation when you're motivated and you're doing well and things are solid. But inevitably, there are going to be times where you're tired or frustrated or lonely or not feeling good. And then when that opportunity presents itself, the temptation's already there with you. And it becomes so easy to give into because you're not constantly always on your guard. So the who is important. The second part of the who is this. If you want to overcome temptation, the second part of the who is focus on other people. Because the Christian life isn't just about not sinning. And even when I'm talking about temptation, this is important for you to be obedient to God, but the goal of your life is not to not sin. You could live your whole life trying to not sin and still face judgment from God and spend eternity separated from him in hell, because it's not what you do that makes you right in the eyes of God. It's who he is. It's his salvation that he offers you as a gift. But if we love Jesus, we're going to want to get to know him and honor him in our life. If you understand what he's done for you, there's this motivation of like, I want to do things his way, which means removing sin from my life, which the Bible talks a lot about. We'll get into that. So it isn't just about you. So the second part of who is find some people to serve and get out of your own just like selfish bubble that you're in. Second question is what? What? Are there like tangible, practical things that I just need to get rid of in my life? I gave my life to God when I was in high school. Before I gave my life to God, I remember, I don't even know where I got it from. I didn't like smoking weed, but a friend gave me a bag of weed, and I hid it like in some weird cavity of my bed so my parents wouldn't find it. And I remember at some point, I'm like walking with Jesus, I'm getting involved in church, and I remembered, I have weed hidden in my room right now. And it wasn't like, I was like, oh, like I love smoking weed. But there were moments that it crossed my mind of like, I could just get some of my friends, and I could, or on my own, like I could just go smoke weed whenever I want because it's there. It's just in my room, and I can grab it whenever I need to. And that thinking in these moments where I'm like learning about temptation, I'm like, I got to deal with that. I can't live with the temptation just sitting in my room at all times. Like, sure, I feel fine right now to be like, no, I don't want to do that. But what about the time where I don't feel strong enough to do that? And so for you guys, if you want to deal and be victorious with temptation in your life, are there open doors in your life that you need to shut? Are there boundaries that you need to set? Are there things that you need to throw away? Are there apps that you need to delete and have someone block on your phone? Like I have a mentor at this church. She's our administrative pastor. And he has a password on my phone. I don't know what it is. And it keeps certain apps from even being able to be on my phone. I have to go up to him to be like, hey, can you put this password in so that I can do whatever on my phone? Because it's not worth it to me to just leave a door open to temptation at all times. And so for you guys, figuring out what is it that is tempting you? What is it that you know has a draw in your heart that you're curious to like go to? That your mind, maybe not always, but you find your mind drifting to like, oh, that's an option for me. I could do that. I could go there. I could, go over to that person's house. Next is where. There are times where you need to physically like get away from situations in your life. I mentioned my friend Dustin, but I learned when I was like, I'm trying to grow and minimizing temptation in my life. I want to like get better at walking with Jesus and not just being a slave to sin. And I realized whenever my friends have like hangouts, I learned, okay, I know what that means. I know what's going to be there. I know the kind of stuff that we're going to do. I know the people that are going to be there, and they're not curious. They're not interested in doing the things that I'm interested in doing. They don't care about God, and it's going to turn into trouble. And I learned, like, I just can't go. All my friends' houses, like, I just can't go there anymore. It's going to open up a door for me that I was going to fall into. Maybe not the first time, maybe not the second time, or even the fifth time or the 10th time. But at some point, that temptation was going to be there, and it was going to be easy for me to just step back into and to fall back into all the things that I've been trying to get away from. So there are appropriate times for leaving situations. You're not a bad person or a bad friend to just be like, hey, sorry, like I can't go. If you need to make an excuse, then do that. If you have a boldness to be like, hey, it's just not good for me, then fine, do that. But it's okay. It doesn't make you a bad person. You're not poorly representing Jesus to be like, nah, sorry, dude, I don't want to go to your house. Like, no, I can't go to that, or no, I don't want to go watch that movie. It's okay. Also, when? That sounds weird, but there are times, and you learn, there are times where like, oh, I'm way more tempted in this situation in certain circumstances. Like maybe when I'm tired, I know I give into this temptation way more. When I'm frustrated, when I'm really excited, here are the things that I typically like run after that are temptations for me. So thinking about like what is the when for me is important. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, no temptation has overtaken you except something common to mankind. And God is faithful. He's not going to allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able, but with the temptation is going to provide the way of escape also, so that you'll be able to endure it. So here's what this means. How many of you guys have heard, like, God's not going to give you more than you can handle? How many of you guys have ever heard that verse? Okay. Most of the time, we hear that verse, and people use it as like God's not going to let bad stuff happen to me because I can't emotionally handle it, so he's not going to do that. That is not what it means. God clearly has a very different perspective of what we can handle than we do. That verse is in this context. The verse says, God will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you can handle, beyond what you're able. Which means this: there is literally no temptation that you can ever face that you can say, oh, I couldn't help it. I didn't have a choice. It was too strong. Like I didn't know what I was doing. It says, with every temptation, God can provide a way of escape so you'll be able to endure it. Now, that way of escape looks different every time. That way of escape might be deleting that app off your phone. That way of escape might be literally running away from a place that you should not be. That way of escape might be like, hey, Mom, can I go with you to the store? Because I shouldn't be home by myself right now. It's up to you guys to figure out the when and then look at, cool, what ways of escape are open for me? This doesn't mean that there's any temptation that you could just completely arrange your life so that's never a temptation again. That's not how it works, but you can minimize it. You can help yourself to overcome temptation by figuring out some of these really practical things. I want to say this, looking at dealing with temptation, I'm not telling you guys this to be like, hey, here's some rules you guys better follow. Because following God's commands, it's not a burden. It's not like, oh, y'all better do some Christian rules. Here they are, guys. It is the greatest life that you will know is living life God's way. It is. And so what you find is and some of you guys have experienced this, when you are fighting temptation, when you're having victory in temptation, things that are struggles that like I've been honoring Jesus in my actions and with my thoughts, it's liberating. It's exciting. It's freeing. It's joyous to walk unencumbered by sin. But we also, a lot of us, myself included, I know what it's like when I'm just letting the devil just roll me from one temptation into the next, just going along with whatever, being like, I don't want to speak up. I kind of like this. I'm just going to go with it. I also know how I feel after that. And I don't feel joy, and I don't feel fulfillment, and I don't feel like, oh man, things are great right now. I end up feeling empty, and I end up feeling regret, and I end up feeling sorrow. I'm going to jump ahead to Psalm 16:11. It says, you will make known to me the way of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. In your right hand, he's talking to God. He says, in God's hand, there are pleasures forevermore. Every good thing that I'm going to know and experience is going to come from God. But this process of overcoming temptation, it's a lifelong one. But I also want to promise you guys this. It's worth it. It's worth it to keep fighting sin in your life until the day that you die. The next bold fill in the blank that you have there says, overcoming temptation is harder in our culture because we embrace sin or we make excuses for it. It's true. There's so many sins that we deal with that the culture's like, oh, you're fine. That's just how you are. That's how you were born. Don't worry about it. Oh, you know what? That's someone else's fault. That's because of what someone else did or whatever. That's not on you. Our culture makes excuses for every kind of sin. Anything that we don't want to do, there's some excuse for us of why we don't have to, why it doesn't matter. Even if God's very specifically like, nah, that's what you need to do. It is worth it to fight temptation, even for the rest of our lives. Because I want to say this, I'm talking about having victory over temptation, but I don't want to mislead you guys and make you think that when you leave this room, that thing that tempted you was all of a sudden just not going to tempt you anymore. That's not what I mean. But when you can recognize a lie, it makes it so that you have power over that temptation and it no longer has power over you. And when that is the case, you can live, even if that temptation is there until the day you die. You can live honoring God and not giving into it. Recognizing, like, yeah, that's there, and I'm going to be careful and cautious and aware of it, but I'm not going to be a slave to it. The Apostle Paul, who is like most famous for being the most incredible, one of the most incredible Christian men who's ever lived on the like face of this earth, Paul writes about his struggles with sin. He writes about, he uses this term, he talks about this thorn in his side. And he's like, I'm praying, asking God to take it away from me, and God's not doing it. And he's like, God told me, like, just trust me. My grace is sufficient for you. And so Paul's like, all right, I guess this temptation isn't going away. I'm just going to live with it, and I'm going to keep pursuing God and honoring him. The things that you struggle with, there will be, by the way, there will be things that you are tempted by now that later on just aren't a big deal. Like me, there will be things that later on you can like laugh and be like, that was so stupid. I can't believe I struggled with that so hard. And that's cool. It's an amazing thing. It's by the grace of God that happens. But there will be other things that you're like, you know what? That anger that I wrestle with is still there. And when things pop up, it rears back up, and I have to like check it over and over. And that might be there until you die. There's nothing wrong with you, and it doesn't make you less spiritual. You can trust God and trust that no temptation is so strong that you can't deal with it. I also want to say this. We're not defined by temptation, and we're not powerless against it. Hebrews 4:15 says, we don't have a high priest who can't sympathize with our weaknesses. Jesus knows whatever you're struggling with, whatever things have popped into your mind, whatever you've given into, God's like, I get it. I know. I was tempted in every way, just like you are. And it says, but one who's been tempted in all things, but without sin. And so he understands, and just like Jesus wasn't defined by the temptations that he faced, and the Bible says he was tempted in every way, you're not defined by what you struggle with. You're not defined by the temptations that you have, because we all have them and they're all different. And so we have to be proactive against temptation and know that it leads to freedom and joy, and we also can't do it alone. That's part of being here, being in community, having people encourage you. I want to invite the band up here. I was at Granite Hills today for their lunch. Carlos leads a Christian club there, and was talking to him about how big of a deal it is to know there are other people who are also dealing with the same stuff you are. How encouraging that is to know, like, you're not the only one struggling. Whatever you're struggling with, there's someone else in this room struggling with the same thing. And to know, hey, like, we're all trying to figure this out. We're all trying to, like, learn how to walk with God. We're all learning how to overcome temptation and become more like Jesus. And sure, we're all in, like, different places of that process, but God designed you to be around other people to help you. And so don't try to do it alone. Part of not doing it alone is knowing that you can have people pray for you. We have older, wiser leaders who want to share life and wisdom for you to help you, who want to invite the Holy Spirit to fill you and to work in your life. And so in terms of overcoming temptation, I want you guys to, in your life, be asking those questions. Who and what and where and when. Minimize those things, but also remember the fight's worth it. It always is. And the struggle that we're in, dealing with sin, it's not worthy to be compared to the glory that God's going to reveal to you. And so we're going to worship the God who freed us from sin. Because if he didn't, we'd all be slaves, and whatever we're tempted by is just like, cool, I guess I'm stuck with this for the rest of my life. But we can overcome by the power of God, by the Holy Spirit. And so we're going to celebrate that God. He's who we're singing songs to. It's not just like a religious exercise. And if you need prayer for something, if you know, like, hey, this has been a struggle in my life, and I want to recognize the lie. I don't want to be a slave to it. I want to learn how to overcome. We want to pray for you. And so I want to invite you guys, as we begin to worship, to just come to the back. We got a bunch of adults who are here because they're excited to pray for you. They're here because they believe God wants to use them to encourage you and to speak life to you. And so they're going to wait expectantly for you to come back. And they're going to welcome you. They're going to ask you your name. They're going to ask you how they can pray for you. And they're going to invite God to come and meet you and work in your situation. Or if you're not a Christian and you don't know the freedom that is in Christ, you don't know what it is to not just be a slave to whatever comes in your mind, in your life. Jesus is the only freedom we have from sin. Otherwise, all of us are dead in our sin. All of us will be separated from God now and for all eternity, except Jesus died to make a way. And so if you're not a Christian, you're like, I want to know the way that Jesus made for me. I want to know what it is to have victory over sin and not live as a slave to it. Come talk to us. We want to pray for you. And the rest of us, let's just give God glory because he's good and because he deserves it. But if you need prayer, don't hesitate to come back. No one's looking at you. No one cares. But God wants to meet you and speak to you. Let's worship.